today I'm officially launching an official petition to the Australian Parliament calling on the Parliament to establish a royal commission into the abuse of media monopoly in Australia, in particular by the Murdoch media, and to make recommendations to maximise media diversity ownership.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And with a week gone by since former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd called for a media royal commission, more than 320,000 people have now signed a petition to Parliament. And in case you're not clear why Kevin Rudd has the Murdoch's News Corp in his sights and not 7, 9 or the ABC, we'll let him explain.
You see, the truth is Murdoch has become a cancer, an arrogant cancer on our democracy. Number one, it's the sheer concentration of Murdoch's media ownership. 70% of our print readership is owned by Murdoch.
That 70% share is disputed, but there's no doubt that News Corp's reach and influence is huge. In the Telegraph and Herald Sun, it has the biggest selling daily and Sunday papers in Sydney and Melbourne. In the Courier and Sunday Mail, it has the only ones in Brisbane. In the Advertiser and Sunday Mail, it has the only ones in Adelaide. And it commands similar monopolies in Hobart and Darwin. It also has a copy-sharing agreement with the only daily and Sunday papers in the West. And as Rudd points out,
in my state of Queensland, which swings so many federal election outcomes, Murdoch owns virtually each and every one of the newspapers up here.
That would be papers in Cairns, Townsville and the Gold Coast, just for starters. News also owns some of Australia's most popular news sites, plus around 90 local papers, and of course the Sky News network, which may not have many viewers, but is certainly watched by politicians. And News Corp is not afraid to use them all as political weapons. The Rudd petition claims in its preamble that the Murdoch's media power
is routinely used to attack opponents in business and politics by blending editorial opinion with news reporting. Australians who hold contrary views have felt intimidated into silence. These facts chill free speech and undermine public debate.
Meanwhile, at election time, since it helped Kevin to power in 2007, Rudd claims News Corp has only backed one team.
Over the last decade, in 18 out of the last 18 federal and state elections, Murdoch has viciously campaigned in support of one side of politics, the Liberal National Party, and viciously campaigned against the Australian Labor Party.
Back in the 2013 election, Media Watch highlighted how Sydney's Telegraph in particular went after Labor, with front pages like this.
Kick this mob out. I know nothing.
Stop the notes.
Does this guy ever shut up?
And when we tallied up the Telly's political stories in the campaign, we found only 6 out of 293 were pro-Labor, while 43 were pro-coalition, and a remarkable 134 were anti-Labor. In the 2019 election, Media Watch found the story repeated. Led by The Australian, the Daily Telegraph and Sky News, News Corp was again shamelessly partisan. And remember, this July front page in the Sunday Telegraph after this year's Eden Monaro by-election.
ScoMo Scorcher.
Popular PM delivers Labor a brutal by-election lesson.
Yet it was Labor who won the seat. But this sort of bias is not limited to election time. Who could forget News Corp's savage campaign against Labor's pink bat scheme, or its constant attacks on Labor's debt and deficit disaster that somehow ceased to be a problem when the coalition borrowed twice as much, or News Corp's relentless denial of the threats posed by climate change.
So let me deal with the issue head on. Does climate change cause these fires? No.
Is that warming really bad or, on the whole, actually good?
It's comments like that, perhaps, that James Murdoch had in mind when he quit the board of News Corp in August, and when he told the New York Times last week.
I think at great news organisations, the mission really should be to introduce fact to disperse doubt, not to sow doubt, to obscure fact, if you will.
James's comments have not been reported in the Murdoch papers here. Meanwhile, Kevin Rudd is not the only former PM to cry alarm. Malcolm Turnbull has frequently accused News Corp of climate denialism, and in August he told Al Jazeera,
"The Murdoch press runs now as a political operation. It's effectively a political party. It is ruthlessly partisan."
And last week, one former Rudd government minister, who's now a paid contributor on Sky, recalled how he once raised his voice.
I once famously said, Newsmen were engaged in regime change. And I absolutely meant it. limited through a major tantrum after the 2010 election when they couldn't get Tony out of their lawyer.
In March 2013, Stephen Conroy was Labor's communications minister. And when he spoke up, what happened? The front page of News Corp's Daily Telegraph compared him to the world's most brutal dictators because he was proposing tougher press regulation. And inside, they dressed him up as Stalin. So perhaps it's no surprise that Rudd's proposal has been met with a massive lack of enthusiasm from our current political leaders, even on the Labor side.
It's a bit like complaining about the referee in a footy game. It might make you feel OK, it doesn't change the outcome or change the result.
It is pretty clear that Rudd's Royal Commission into Media Power has little chance of getting up, and even less of bringing change. And despite more than 320,000 people signing that petition, the proposal has barely even been mentioned in the News Corp papers. Well, fancy that. Nor, remarkably, has last week's dramatic news on the Barrier Reef, which somehow also escaped the attention of News Corp's editors.
A 30-year study of the Great Barrier Reef has revealed coral populations have declined by 50%. Scientists say every minute counts in the race to preserve what is left, and it starts with reducing global emissions.
That story, reporting a new study from Australia's Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies, ran on TV, radio, online and in newspapers all around the world. In Australia, the USA, the UK, Europe and Asia. And according to Media Monitor's Meltwater, the reef's plight scored a mention in more than 700 stories around the world. But amazingly, it wasn't in the Australian or any of the News Corp metro papers like the Telly and Herald Sun, or the Queensland dailies where the reef is vital for tourism, or in its 90 local papers, and it was not even on news.com.au, although they and the Telly did run a short video from Reuters. So, did the editors of all those titles independently decide it was not worth covering? We asked News Corp to comment on Rudd's petition and on why it didn't cover the coral story, but we got no response. My guess is they ignored the study published by the prestigious Royal Society because the authors found the coral deaths were caused by climate change and urged,
There is no time to lose. We must sharply decrease greenhouse gas emissions ASAP.
And that, of course, does not fit in with what former PM Malcolm Turnbull describes as News Corp's climate denialist agenda. But now, to the remarkable story of a convicted drug smuggler who is suing the media over this report 3 years ago on Nine's A Current Affair.
Now the successful mining executive and his gym junkie mate who tried to set themselves up for life. But their plan to make millions of dollars smuggling cocaine didn't quite go to plan.
Military-grade encrypted phones, cash-drop rendezvous, bikini-clad pool parties and a sausage stuffer.
Yes, it was tabloid TV gold, involving a man from the glamorous end of town.
Bennet Schwartz had it all. A private school education, a lucrative executive's pay packet and a beautiful fiancée.
But of course, on conviction, Schwartz lost it all and landed himself in prison for 3.5 years. And now he's out of jail, he's suing Nine for injurious falsehood, misleading and deceptive conduct and defamation. So, what is the basis of his complaint? First, that Nine portrayed him as a wealthy senior executive at Rio Tinto.
A lucrative executive's pay packet.
When in fact he was just a recent graduate, which a judge found led to a violent attempt to extort money from him. But second, and more importantly, that ACA interviewed a criminal lawyer, LJ Subeska, who told viewers Schwartz was a police informant.
He would have looked and appeared like the weakest link, the easiest target to roll to turn police informant.
And how did Subeska figure that? Because Schwartz handed over his BlackBerry to the police.
It's an encrypted device. Police cannot intercept these phones. So it's obvious that Schwartz would have given police his password to use his phone because there is no other way that they would have received it. So they turned him police informant effectively.
But in fact, Schwartz was not a police informer. And at his sentencing, the court found he only handed over the password to his BlackBerry because he was compelled to under the Commonwealth Crimes Act. And why does that matter? Well, unfortunately for Schwartz, when that ACA program went to air, he was on remand in Sydney's Long Bay jail. And according to the evidence of Schwartz's cellmate, which was accepted by the judge, as A Current Affair was played in prison,
chants of dog, dog, dog began to emanate from the wing, and a short time after that his cellmate noticed that the offender had been wounded. The offender told him that he had been stabbed.
Schwartz says he suffered from stab wounds, contusions and bruising and PTSD as a result of the prison attacks. And back in 2018, his sentencing judge, Peter Berman, was in no doubt about why those happened.
I am satisfied that Schwartz was attacked in custody as a result of that irresponsible television program. For it to be said that he was somehow a police informer was not only wrong, but dangerous indeed.
And that is why Schwartz is now seeking compensation. His lawyer, Mark Davis, told NCA Newswire last week,
courtesy of a Current Affairs wrong accusation that he was a police informer, he was beaten, he was threatened, he lived in terror, and ultimately he was stabbed. They traumatised him, all for a bit of light entertainment.
So, what does Nine have to say in its defence? Well, it denies the allegations and will fight the proceedings. And News Director Darren Wick told Media Watch,
Davis's description is false and offensive. Nine reported the conviction of Schwartz and others on charges of commercial drug importation, which are serious and important matters of public interest about which the community has a right to be informed.
And he added,
of course, Nine does not condone the doing of any unlawful act causing injury to any person, whether in custody or otherwise.
We'll let you know what happens. But the sentencing judge described Nine's reporting as inaccurate, dangerous and irresponsible. And while we're on the subject of drug criminals, let's turn to the Daily Telegraph and this recent handy guide to
New South Wales illegal drug hotspots,
which reveals that New South Wales dealers were using Instagram to ply their trade and offering free drop-offs, and which was chock full of shocking drug statistics, including one that would have had Newcastle residents spluttering over their cornflakes.
The idyllic Newcastle seaside suburb of Meriwether recorded 268 narcotics dealers, more than 4 times as many as Mount Druitt in Sydney's west.
That is incredible, but the telly had a table to prove it, with Meriwether having the highest number of narcotics dealers in the state in the 12 months from March last year, which is a stunning achievement for the popular beachside suburb, given that it's home to only around 11,000 residents, leaving one local news site to gasp.
Meriwether revealed as top drug hotspot in the state.
But one local was not buying that claim, telling Media Watch that, having read the story,
it immediately did not ring true.
And indeed, she's right, because what the Bureau of Crime Statistics actually says is the Meriwether figure of 268 records the number of drug incidents, not drug dealers. Whoops, that's more like it. As the Bureau explained to Media Watch,
one offender may have been responsible for multiple incidents, which is very often the case for dealing or trafficking.
And that leads us to the key question, how many drug dealers were busted in Meriwether? And the answer?
In the 12 months to March 2020, the New South Wales Police commenced legal proceedings for deal or traffic narcotics against 2 people for incidents occurring in Meriwether.
Oh dear, not 268 dealers, but 2, who must have been pretty busy. And the same error, mixing up incidents and dealers, was repeated throughout the story, leading to other choice examples like this.
The Mudgee region, best known as a food and wine destination, also boasts the unenviable title of the state's amphetamines capital, with towns within the 2850 postcode registering 226 dealers.
And what was the correct figure? 5. The telly has now fixed the mistakes, taken down the incorrect tables and added this editor's note.
A previous version of this story referred to the number of drug dealers in a suburb. It should have referred to the number of drug charges.
But that correction was made only after the Crime Bureau contacted the paper. And it could all have been avoided with a simple phone call to the Bureau in the first place. And finally, to the ongoing fight for press freedom and long overdue relief for one ABC journalist.
Federal police have formally dropped their case against the ABC's Dan Oakes over his reporting on the so-called Afghan files. The decision ends a 3-year ordeal for the journalist who is facing potential imprisonment for using leaked classified documents.
For 763 days, Dan Oakes had the threat of jail hanging over his head for exposing alleged war crimes by Australian troops in Afghanistan. His ABC colleague and co-author Sam Clark faced a similar threat until 3 months ago, when the AFP dropped its investigations into him. And last Thursday, Oakes too was finally told he was clear, with the Commonwealth DPP ruling.
While lawyers did think there were reasonable prospects of a successful conviction, they ultimately concluded the public interest does not require a prosecution.
And that, of course, is what we and the Australian media long argued, leaving the ABC's Gavin Morris to ask, in exasperation,
what has been the public cost of this whole exercise. Well, I say what a clumsy, cumbersome, expensive way for the system to work to, in the end, reinforce the principle that there should be a public interest test.
So, is that the end of the story? Well, no. As Dan Oakes writes,
there is one man who still faces prosecution over this matter, David Mcbride. A former military lawyer who was deployed to Afghanistan with our Special Operations Task Group, Mcbride has been charged with a number of offences and his trial is ongoing. Please follow his trial and speak up about it.
it's important to remember that press freedom has never been just about journalists. It's also about courageous whistleblowers who risk all by speaking out. Without them, we might never know what the state is trying to hide. And that's why the fight for proper legal protection for whistleblowers and public interest journalism must continue. That's all from us tonight. There's more on our website where you can read the full statement from 9. And don't forget, Media Bites every Thursday on your favourite social media platform. But for now, until next week, goodbye.